Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Talk to them, there's no one to talk to. I just talk to you. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.
All right, good day, everyone. Welcome to the New Jersey Psychological Association's Power of the Spoken Word podcast series. I'm Dr. Daniel Lee, and this is the best place to get all of the information you want on topics about New Jersey psychology and psychologists. Our podcasts are created as a resource for everyone who lives, loves, works, and plays in New Jersey. Today, I'm joined by the following guests: Dr. Frank Cilio. He's a New Jersey licensed psychologist and award-winning author, national and international speaker. He's the founder and executive director of the Center for Psychological Enhancement in Ridgewood, New Jersey. He received his doctorate in counseling psychology from Fordham University. He is the author of 12 award-winning children's books and have been translated into 4 languages. He is also the author of a parenting book for parenting children with chronic medical illnesses, and we're going to talk about that today. Dr. Cilio has maintained a private practice since 1995. He works with children, adolescents, adults, and families. Since 2010, Dr. Cilio has consistently been recognized as one of New Jersey's top kids docs. Dr. Cilio has taught at Fordham University and St. Thomas Aquinas College. His research has been published in journals and presented in conferences in the US and Canada. He is often the go-to psychologist in the media for his insight on a variety of psychological topics, health issues, and parenting. You can find him on all of the usual social media outlets. So this is our 4th installment of our book club series. So in these episodes, we work to introduce you to an author and discuss their book and how it can influence your work with clients and be a resource to the community at large. So today, we'll be discussing When Your Child Has a Chronic Medical Illness, a guide for the parenting journey. It just won the silver medal for the Independent Publisher Book Award, or the IPPY. I think if I said that right. So congratulations on another awards. I guess does that mean you have 13 awards, or is it still 12?
13.
So, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, because the one thing I'm always interested in when we're having these conversations is writing, because people always talk about, what is this process like? I have a book in me, I have an idea and the concepts, but sometimes for folks, it never gets past that. So to hear you in your 13th award, so far, I guess I'm interested. I'm wondering if our audience would be interested in what is your writing process, like, and sort of what motivates and sort of directs your work.
Well, thank you for having me first. Certainly, what motivates me is the work with my clients. They're the inspiration for where I gather lots of my material for my children's books and for this parenting book that I wrote. There's no particular process. Some people like, I write notes on lots of paper. I've like little slips of paper everywhere. Sometimes I'm in my notes section of my phone. And sometimes it's directly onto the laptop. Writing is, it is a discipline, it is an art. And, certainly, those that are watching, listening, everyone has a story. And I think that, we're in the business as psychologists of listening to people's stories. And we all have stories. And we all have something to offer new, refreshing to bring to the table. And I think that, it just really comes down to like taking the idea from here or in your heart and putting it down somewhere and taking those steps. So certainly, writing a 419-page parenting book is completely different than writing a 32-page children's book. And I'm not saying that writing children's books are easier, by no means. It's just a different style of writing and a different headspace that you're in, because when I wrote this parenting book, it's like, research and making it, again, accessible to people that are going to be reading this book, and hopefully a lot of resources for them. When you're writing a children's book, You're thinking like a kid, and how would the kid say this, and how might a kid receive this? So it's definitely using different parts of the brain and fun. I mean, after all is said and done, I think I prefer writing kids books over the parenting book.
I'm just thinking the page limits will probably motivate me. 32 versus 400.
Yes.
I hear that.
Other than my dissertation, I never wrote
Exactly.
anything of that volume. So
Yes.
it's certainly, as you mentioned at the top of the show, the awards, and the awards are lovely, and it's nice to be recognized. But certainly, and this is going to sound a little corny and trite, but really, when kids tell me that they learned something from my books, or they really enjoyed them, or parents are it helps them through a particular rough patch in their lives, that's really the best. That's the reason why I write them. I mean, anyone that has written books knows that you are not going to become a millionaire writing books. I mean, it's certainly something that you do out of a passion, out of a fire in your belly, that you really want to get a message out there to people.
I'm curious, before we get into the premise, because I'm curious what's in that 419 page document, and sort of how you, if that was something that motivated you based on your sort of client contacts, because I think about that a lot in terms of managing children with chronic illnesses. It's like we talk about it and sometimes we look at it. But when I thought about your topic, I was like, wow, I never really thought about it from what would be different in terms of parenting, in
Right.
that process. So I'm curious about that. But before we get to that, as I was listening to you, I know we get early career psychologists or ECPs listening to us, and they're always thinking about how they can connect to more experienced psychologists and get ideas about sort of how to grow. So I'm wondering, just based on what you said before we shift to the sort of on the book of the day, could you talk a little bit to that group to say if they were thinking about writing, what should they be considering? If that might be a professional aspiration, another opportunity to diversify their skill sets.
Right. Certainly write what you feel passionate about. Because if you write, even when I did my dissertation, if you don't love the topic, it's going to, why bother? So first there's the passion, and there's a need that you have to express that. Also, I advise writers, whether they're writing kids books or other kinds of books, is to do a survey of the market, see what's out there, see what's already been said. What does your voice bring differently to the table? What kind of unique perspective can you offer in your work? And so, first is kind of understanding, do a search of all different books if you're writing about a particular topic. And then, kind of outlining, and then kind of really coming up with a really good outline of what you want to say. What is your thesis statement of the book? What do you really want to convey at the end of the day? So when someone takes your book and walks away from it, what are they going to take away from it? And then it comes down to the logistics of, writing a good query letter for publishers and finding out what publishers are accepting unsolicited manuscripts if you're not an agent, if you're not agented, to find someone that's going to accept and read your work. And there's a lot of rejection, and certainly I encourage writers and anyone in their lives, whatever they're pursuing, is to persevere. Because it's sort of, I get through three things in my life: patience, perseverance, and prayer. So it's in the publishing world, be patient with the process. They don't always get back to you very quickly, if they get back to you at all. Persevere and keep putting it out there, and writing short articles about it. If you don't publish a book, writing articles around that, and pray that they acquire your book if that's your thing. So certainly that's the advice I might give to someone. And often people contact me about how to go about those processes, and I'm very happy to talk to people about that that journey for them, and what my journey was like, which may be different than theirs, but certainly how I can help them along their journey.
Wow. And we might take you up on that for the ECP committee, because they're always looking to want to meet with folks to say, can you tell us how to
Sure.
do some things? And I love your perspective in terms of building the writing into your practice. I think we sort of take for granted that we do have a versatile skill set and knowledge base, and a lot of ways that sort of apply it. And I was thinking about your 3 Ps to help us transition into the parenting book, because when you talked about patience, perseverance, and prayer, I was trying to figure out how are those elements possibly connected to the premise of your book? Because as you said that, I was thinking about those are elements that probably parents would need to sort of on that journey of dealing with a child with a medical illness.
I
So talk to us
definitely,
a little bit about that.
yeah, I definitely touch upon those elements in the book. There's different chapters. I cover everything from, I use the metaphor of a journey and kind of we start with our feelings and identifying what they are, and then kind of self-care for the parent, because the parent needs to engage in self-care first. Sort of the idea when you're on a plane, put your oxygen mask on first so that you can take care of the children. And that we talk about, I talk about in the book, taking care of siblings and your co-pilots and grandparents and, setting healthy boundaries around people. So those three elements are in the book. We do, I do talk about humor, use of humor, and mindfulness, spirituality when you're confronted with an illness or a diagnosis you didn't ask for. And so, you had asked earlier about this book, and the genesis of it really began for me in when I started graduate school in 1989. A while ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long. But anyway, so in 1989, I was struggling with a lot of GI issues and went through a series of tests and medical stuff. And I later found out, after many misdiagnoses, that I have Crohn's disease. And Crohn's disease is inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract from the mouth to the anus. And it's an embarrassing, painful, uncomfortable disease which there's no cure, but it is manageable. And so I wrote my first children's book, actually, called Toilet Paper Flowers, because I had a patient. I was getting referrals of kids that had GI issues. And one of the little girls, I use books in my practice often to read to kids. And this young girl said to me, "Dr. Frank, how come there's no book for us?" She knew that I had Crohn's. She had Crohn's disease. And it got me to thinking about, okay. And so I wrote Toilet Paper Flowers, and that was published in 2005. And that was sort of the beginning of my speaking engagements across the country and internationally about bringing psychology to medical concerns, because everyone gets the best medical care when they're diagnosed with something. They get the best medical care, which is completely understandable. But what isn't often, and the research kind of documents this, is that people do not seek out the help of a mental health professional. And so I started talking across the country, and the media would call me and talk to me about this and say, that taking care of your mental health is important, because oftentimes when people get a diagnosis of something, people will say, "Of course you're depressed. You have cancer. Of course you're anxious. You can't find the bathroom and you have Crohn's." Well, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be addressed.
Exactly.
And in this book, this book kind of came from all the talks I was giving to families across the country. And the accents may change, and the geography may change, and the climate may change, but you know what? The feelings don't change. Yes. The sense of looking for information, for looking for support and validation, I was met with. And so, this book sort of kind of making lemonade out of lemons for me. So it's sort of like taking all my 25 years of being a psychologist and talking about chronic illness, chronic medical illness, and kind of putting it into this book. And I should note that the book, I also chose a co-writer for this book, Carol Potter, who's a marriage and family therapist in California. And I asked her to join me on this journey because she had a real good background in marriage and family work. And she's a very spiritual person. And I wanted her expertise to bring that element to the book. So that was fun, also co-writing a book, which I had never done before.
Oh, that's cool.
So, so that was really the kind of impetus for me to kind of say, okay, I want to kind of reach these parents, these families that are dealing with so many things, dealing with hearing words they never heard before, dealing with doctors and practitioners that they never have to put their trust in, that they've never had to put their trust in before. And this is their child, their most precious person in their life, and how
Mm-hmm.
marriages are affected by chronic illness. I always say it's like dropping a pebble in a still pond. Chronic illness is like dropping a pebble in a still pond, and the rippling effects go out. But sometimes it's like dropping a boulder in a still pond. So that's really the story behind the book.
And it's sort of, as you were talking, I do assessments, and one of the things that I told people, even as I train people to do assessments, particularly when you're working with children, it's the grief of a diagnosis. And I said, so what we find is parents have an idea about who their child is, and most parents say, they want and believe and hope their child is perfect, and then when they have to hear that something is wrong with my child, whether, like you say, it's physically or mentally, it's a grief process that goes along with that. So, as I was thinking about your 3 Ps and even your motivation, it's like, can we provide the space for all of that work in addition to taking and raising care of a child? So it's like that doesn't get exempt from all of the stuff. Now they have another layer of it, because now they have to sort of manage an issue that they might have been prepared for, they weren't educated about, and even deal with sort of other systems. So in my case, it'll be with special education. And then they're like, okay, so what is this? And how do I have to advocate now? And what is this learning difference? And what impact will this have on their development and whatever outcomes that they've had for that child? So in terms of how to make sure that happens. So, so I'm curious in terms of, as we as clinicians are working with clients, how should we explore this book? What should we take away from it, and sort of working with parents or children who are dealing with chronic illness?
Certainly it's a guide, and it's certainly we like to think it's comprehensive, and that it covers all the areas you were even just touching upon: how to deal with school systems, a 504, an IEP, how to talk, who's in the hospital, who are the players here, those kinds of things, how to deal with difficult procedures. I wrote a chapter on dealing with needle phobias and different, MRIs and different those procedures that, again, you're hearing words you never heard before, and oftentimes parents are afraid to ask questions because they feel stupid or they feel anxious. And I talk about a lot of tools in the book about what kinds of things parents can do when they go to visit the doctor and how they should set up appointments, etc. Clinicians using the book, it's not a book that I think that you don't need to read it cover to cover.
Okay. And
the same would be for parents reading this book. I think if you're dealing with a death situation, go right to that chapter, and we kind of talk about that in the book. If your child is up for a difficult procedure, go right to that chapter. And I think that parents can use the book, and clinicians, to kind of where their clients are, where they are. It may be overwhelming. Again, they're already overwhelmed. You hand them a book and you say, "Here, read this," and it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is overwhelming." So we, as clinicians, we might want to guide them and say, "You know what, read chapter 2, and let me know what you think about that." The self-care chapter. Are you engaging in self-care? Where's your self-care plan? Are you doing some, maybe mindfulness practices? Where's your spirituality at? Where are you kind of in your relationship with your significant other? Those kinds of things. So again, I don't think it's a book that you have to read cover to cover. It's a resource where people can cherry pick where they need to go, depending on where they're at, so that they're not overwhelmed.
You keep bringing up the family dynamic piece. So I am curious if you could talk a little bit more about the impact on a couple's relationship when it comes to this. Is it anything that, as a clinicians, we need to be aware of or focused on if that comes into the room?
Yes, there's a bit of, maybe myth that, when someone's diagnosed with a chronic illness, that marriages fall apart. The research doesn't support that. However, we do need to be mindful of, with kinds of all different kinds of families, in the sense of, single families and divorced families, and, how do you parent? Parenting is hard enough in this world, and so, like you said earlier in the podcast, it's like, you put a chronic illness on that and say there's a problem there already, it's going to magnify that problem a lot. So that's why, in the book we advocate a lot. I mean, myself and Carol are both mental health professionals, so we obviously advocating for people to seek the help of of a mental health professional early on, even if you don't go see them immediately. Like, just have a resource there that can help you. You don't have to see them weekly or 3 times a week.
Exactly.
You can use them as a resource to pop in and out. Someone who's familiar with chronic illness, someone who's familiar with grief issues, someone who might be familiar with marital issues and family issues, so they can help navigate some of those really difficult challenges that might arise in deciding, okay, who's going to get the groceries, who's going to pick up the kids, where's our intimate life, how do we manage the money, who's going to call the insurance company, on top of all the other things that go on into being a family in a family these days. I mean, on top of that, right now we're coming out of pandemic, but certainly, that added to all that, stress and anxiety that people were experiencing. So we really caution people, but we certainly also say, reach out for help. And that, oftentimes we have a subchapter saying, oh no, and not another appointment, when referring to seeing a mental health professional. Again, it doesn't have to be a weekly appointment. It could just be someone who's a resource to you. And there's lots of people in hospital settings, child care specialists, child life specialists, they're called, or social workers in the hospital that can be really supportive to the family. So couples just need to do inventory. When you get the diagnosis, again, not everyone's in the same emotional space at the same time. Your partner may be angry at this moment, and you may be more in the accepting phase. And so we need to respect that. We need to respect where people are emotionally, and that we're not always going to be feeling the same way. And that we also come to the table from different backgrounds and different ethnicities, different culture, how we deal with problem solving and illness. So it's really important that couples are just cognizant of that and keep that, sort of like the clouds in the sky, like we're just aware that they're there. Okay. And just be aware of that.
Well, the more you keep talking, the more you're generating questions for me. So I got 2 more. One is, you talked about diversity, and then my other piece is about integrated care. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about, since there's such a movement, particularly in New Jersey, around integrated care, and even our role as clinicians in that. I'm curious how your book could be a resource to help with that transition. And then I'll do a follow-up question about diversity.
Sure. I think that, integrative care, like knowing who the players are, as I said earlier, that in the book, we really have a flow chart or a chart of, who the players are, because you need to know, because people are, you don't know what maybe this discipline does. And then people feel inhibited to asking. So oftentimes, even in my own experience as a patient, is that, someone is not pulling it all together for you. You have, the general practitioner, you have the surgeon, you have the oncologist, or you have, the anesthesiologist, and no one is really kind of tying it all together. What's really happening? How can we really help this family? How can we really help this child? Oftentimes in my work with patients that have chronic medical illnesses, whether they be adult patients or kids, is that the psychologist or the mental health professional can really pull everything together. Because oftentimes, even in my own practice, I would like to speak to other disciplines, and they don't always reach out. Like the psychiatrist isn't always reaching out to me about my patients. So it's like, I want to have that ongoing communication. I think that's really important, because otherwise things fall through the cracks. And then what that does is it creates anxiety for the families. And also, it also can reinvent the wheel and redoing things over and over and over again, or, families trying to keep track of, when did we have that test? And what did that doctor say? And how do we kind of keep this all together? Because it's overwhelming. So integrative care, when it comes to chronic illness, and we talk about this, is so important. And communication is so important, and documenting and keeping your own records. And there's lots of apps. In the back of our book, we have a very large resource page that goes through how to get a babysitter, how to order your groceries online, how to get medication at low cost, books for kids on different chronic illnesses. So there's lots of resources that, that people aren't even aware that are there, that can help them manage this better and build better communication amongst the family and amongst the professionals that are treating your child.
So I'm hearing that like there's a lot of skills building and capacity building opportunities with the book, and that's really good in terms of a resource. And that sort of gets me into the piece that you sort of were alluding to earlier around diversity and sort of the implications from sort of a cross-cultural perspective. And I'm wondering what thoughts or ideals will we find in the book related to that?
You know, that could be another whole.
I can imagine.
There you go. Anyone listening?
Exactly.
That's the fresh. See, that's when you're looking to write a book. It's like, oh, this is the fresh approach. You know, this book. But seriously, and you know, that could really be a whole book in itself on how different cultures, religions, etc., address you know, the issue of illness and dealing with medical things as well as psychological issues. We know that as psychologists, you know, certain cultures respond to therapy differently, right? Or they have they're maybe reticent to seeking help, right? So, or they come to therapy with a very medical model in mind. So that's another whole book. We do talk about that, and we do talk about people doing a self-assessment of that very early on in the book. Where are your values? Where, you know, where's your partner's values? We do talk about you know, gay and lesbian couples. We talk about single parent families. We talk about divorced families. We talk about people who are widowers. We talk about, as we cite some studies about different cultures and how they respond to chronic illness. But, you know, it just, like I said, it would just be another whole book. We often get asked too, like, how come you didn't include autism in there? Because that's another whole book on its own. We didn't include depression and other chronic illnesses, but you know, we just decided to focus on, you know, the chronic medical, not that those other things don't have medical components to them, but certainly we wanted to keep that because, like I said, there's another book.
Right. I hear you. And it's interesting because even when you're just talking about the medical piece, to be honest, you don't hear a lot about that. And I'll work with some college age population, and you'll be amazed how many students come in with chronic illnesses. And then you're kind of walking through that as something else that they're managing in addition to whatever else we might be treating. So I actually think that is a neat perspective.
We do offer you know, advice about, you know, for lower socioeconomic groups, how to access, you know, because they don't have the access to healthcare that more affluent individuals do. So we do talk about that in the book and kind of tools on how they can access some care for their children and for themselves. At the end of each chapter, we have a next step section. So it's sort of actionable steps of what you can, you know, from reading the chapter now, what's the next step for you? What do you do next to further that?
Well, this has been really rich. And I know we're going to sort of transition into sort of our kind of last talking point, which is really thinking about for the folks who may never come to therapy. And I think this is a broader question, given that you've written children books as well as the parenting book. I'm wondering, what can the community sort of think about, or how should they be sort of engaging your work? So if you want to sort of give us sort of an overview of some of the children's books topics and anything that you want to highlight in your parenting book, I think this will be helpful for just folks who are just listening, who might want to know, well, I hear there's a book on Crohn's. What else is available, you know, that I might want to think about with, you know, in my work, either as a clinician or just as a parent that might want to, you know, have an opportunity to engage my child?
Sure. It's really, you know, it's really a potpourri of topics. I've written from chronic illness and Crohn's, lactose intolerance. I have 4 children's books on mindfulness. It's something that I practice. It's something that I use in my work, something that's in the chronic illness book. And so I've written, one is a B series where Bentley B, my character, takes kids through a yoga, mindfulness meditation, and a meditation called Loving Kindness. And I've written another mindfulness book. I wrote a book on being a good winner and a good loser. I have a book on building self-confidence, gossip amongst kids. And snitching and tattletaling. And my most recent book that came out in April is called Blossom and Bud. And it's a story on body positivity and body image. Oh, wow. Blossom is a sunflower who doesn't like her height. And Bud is this little bud who hasn't yet grown. And so he's just not happy being a little bud. And I won't reveal how it ends, but it's really about accepting ourselves, not just in height, but basically the premise is beauty comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors.
Right.
And so, those books, really, they're really diverse in the sense of topics. And what I get this question a lot, is what do I love about writing children's books? And it's not getting the book at the end. It's watching the illustrator come to life, bring my characters to life. And to me, that's so awesome. And I love, just seeing, Bentley come to life, or any of my Blossom and Bud, what they look like. And the words are important, but in a picture book, so are the illustrations, because kids will know when something's not right, and kids will call you out on that, like that doesn't look right, or and then they get distracted, and then there blows the whole book. So my Snitchy Witch, I have a book called Snitchy Witch about tattling, and Wanda the Witch had to look just a particular way, so so I've been very fortunate. Most of my books are published by Imagination Press, which is the children's imprint of the American Psychological Association. And I'm really proud about that, because, being a psychologist is something I've always wanted to be since 7th grade.
Wow.
And I know, if you look at my 7th grade yearbook, which would be scary because the picture's scary, but underneath my name, it says psychologist. And, I wanted to be a psychologist, and, the books, I lost my point with that, but the point, the books allow me to bring, psychology to other kids that I can't see in my office. And as I was saying, I was really proud as a psychologist to have these books published by the American Psych Association. So it's it's an organization I'm proud to be part of, in a community of psychologists. And so, I've been very fortunate to have them acquire my books, and I hope they keep acquiring them.
Yes. I'm definitely buying the Blossom and Bud for my 2-year-old niece. So I was like, oh, that's a good one. I'm gonna get that. So I'm loving that one already, because her parents are already like, she's tall for her age. So I'm like, these growth charts are out of date for decades. My kids are tall for their age, so I was like, don't even worry about it. But I'm definitely buying that. And I guess one of the things that we've been talking about, sort of as a closing point, is the ideal of our theme this year, Agile Resilience. And I'll define that real quick. So we're defining resilience as the ability to bounce back from a negative experience or difficult challenge, face a problem or challenge, overcome it, and get back to life a little bit stronger and a little bit wiser. Agility is able to adapt and innovate by adding new practices to react to a crisis. So for our 2021 mental health awareness campaign, our plan is to explore agile resilience throughout the diverse populations in our community within New Jersey. And particularly as we're coming out of COVID and just transitioning to that was one of the motivating factors. And we wanted to examine it from a diversity of culture, socio-economic status, families, elderly, youth, and really think about how each segment can build an agile response to living through the pandemic, and how these tools can be applied to pretty much everyone's everyday life. So as I'm listening to you, I feel like your books are a resource today. So I'm just curious. So if you want to sort of kind of see if there's any other connections that you can make around that, in terms of sort of how has your writing helped facilitate agile resilience?
I hope it has. I mean, I hope that these books, because they hopefully validate feelings and thoughts, it talks about how, whether they be the children's books or the parenting book, that there is hope out there. That you're not alone. That's oftentimes what kids, when they come to my office, feel like I'm the only one that feels this way, thinks this way, behaves this way. And I think as psychologists, giving them the tools of resilience, of bouncing back, especially even beyond now COVID, even beyond the pandemic, is, that we were teaching, I think, that before the pandemic happened. And I think as parents also kind of teaching them that. And I think, if we have that, if we continue that foundation of building agility and resilience, I think that we will come out of this stronger and healthier. I hope that my books help to accomplish those goals of helping kids and families bounce back from whatever they're dealing with, whether it be, chronic medical illness, or I have a book on homesickness, and just bouncing back from anything that they're faced in their lives. In the back of all my children's books, there's always a note to parents and caregivers on how to use the book, how to read the book to them, what kinds of skills, what kinds of concepts do we want to help foster discussions further after reading the book or during the book. And so I think that I'm hoping that, again, that promotes resiliency in kids, and that they come away from it feeling stronger, healthier, as a result of not just my books, but interactions with teachers and those of us that interact with kids and families and adults on a daily basis. Oftentimes feel so alone, so isolated.
Sure.
And that there is people out there to listen to them. There are people out there that can help them. It doesn't have to cost a fortune, and there are resources that they can tap into to help their families.
That's true, and I would just want to end with a thought that there's power in a good book. And I think in terms of the message, the metaphors, and sort of what we communicate. And I want to thank you for taking the time in your career to write, sounds like 13 powerful books. And we appreciate your energy, your time, and your dedication to the profession and to the community. So, on that note, we want to close with, we thank you for joining us today. We appreciate all of your time and energy, and we're hoping that you got a really good experience. This is a really rich conversation, I think, at a lot of levels. So if you're looking for that resource, feel free to check out Dr. Frank Cilio. And I think if you Google him, you'll find everything. So hopefully that'll work.
Everything's on my website.
So we appreciate that. So have a good day, and until the next time.
Disclaimer. This podcast is intended to provide members of the general public with access to information regarding the potential benefits of psychological treatment. This podcast is not intended as a referral service, an advertisement of services, or a solicitation of business, and is not intended to create a psychologist-patient relationship between any of the podcast participants and the listener. Any individual status as a participant on this podcast does not suggest recommendation of any such individual as a provider of services by NJPA or its affiliates. Thank you for listening to the NJPA Power of the Spoken Word podcast series. Remember that psychologists can provide meaningful insights to improve our understanding of things that matter in life. As experts in human emotions, behavior, and functioning, psychologists work with you to bring you the positive changes you want in your life. Be sure to visit the NJPA website at www.psychologynj.org and follow NJPA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.